The most surprising moments in life are not always the moments when people discover who someone is. Sometimes, they are the moments when they realize they never truly saw that person at all. Dr. Michael Carter had spent years saving lives, comforting families, and carrying a responsibility that few people ever understood. Yet on one ordinary afternoon in Dallas, Texas, he found himself in a situation where none of those things were visible. Before anyone knew his name, his profession, or the lives he had changed, he was simply a man standing in a moment of uncertainty. And Michael was about to learn that sometimes the hardest test of character is not what you do when people recognize you, but what you do when they do not. For more than a decade, Dr. Carter had built his reputation as a respected cardiologist. Inside the hospital where he worked, patients knew him as the doctor who listened carefully, explained difficult answers with patience, and treated every person with the same level of care. He never believed that a medical degree made him more important than anyone else. To Michael, being a doctor was not about status. It was about service. Every morning, he walked through the hospital doors knowing that someone would need his knowledge, his attention, and sometimes simply his compassion. Outside those walls, however, he was just another person moving through the city. Most strangers never knew about the years of dedication behind his career. They never saw the late nights studying, the difficult choices, or the commitment that shaped him into the doctor he became. Michael was comfortable with that. He never needed applause from people who did not know his story. He believed that a person's value existed long before anyone recognized their achievements. That belief was also reflected in his personal life. Michael was married to Sarah Anderson Carter, a woman he deeply respected and loved. Their relationship was built on trust, kindness, and a shared understanding that neither person needed to define themselves through another person's identity. Sarah had her own accomplishments, her own reputation, and her own path. Michael never introduced himself. Through his connections, he wanted people to know him for the choices he made, not the names associated with him. That afternoon, everything changed because a simple situation created a moment where assumptions moved faster than the truth. The people around him did not know they were looking at a doctor who had dedicated his life to helping others. They did not know the person in front of them had spent years earning the trust of patients and families. They only saw what was visible in that single moment. Michael noticed the change around him, but he remained calm. He had learned throughout his life that every person carried a story that could not be understood immediately. A stranger could never see the entire journey behind someone's face. As the situation continued, Michael made a decision. He would not rush to explain his achievements. He would not use his profession as a shield. He would simply allow the truth to reveal itself when the time came. Because Michael Carter understood something many people forget. A person should not need a title, a connection, or a powerful name before they deserve respect. The most difficult moments are not always the ones where people face a challenge. Sometimes, they are the moments when someone must decide whether to explain themselves or simply allow the truth to arrive in its own time. For Dr. Michael Carter, that decision came naturally. Throughout his life, he had learned that patience could reveal more than arguments ever could. As the situation in Dallas, Texas continued, Michael remained calm while others tried to understand what was happening. He knew that the people around him only had a small piece of the story. They did not know the years of dedication behind his medical career. They did not know the patients who trusted him, the families who appreciated his care, or the countless hours he spent preparing to become the doctor he was today. They only saw one moment, and Michael understood how easily one moment could create the wrong impression. Instead of trying to prove his importance, he chose to stay composed. His decision was not based on fear or uncertainty. It came from a belief he had carried for years. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity before anyone knows their accomplishments. Inside the hospital, Michael had seen the same principle in a different way. Every patient who walked through the doors carried a story that could not be understood immediately. A person's situation never revealed everything about their life. Someone could be struggling, successful, uncertain, or confident, but there was always more beneath the surface. Michael believed the same was true for himself. He did not want people to change their behavior because they discovered he was a doctor. He wanted them to understand that respect should exist before any title was revealed. As the hours passed, information about the situation began moving through official channels. Details that had not been clear at the beginning were slowly being reviewed. Somewhere across the city, people were beginning to realize that there was more to the story than what first appeared. But Michael was not focused on who might arrive or what might happen next. His focus remained on maintaining his own values. He thought about Sarah and the life they had built together. Their relationship had always been based on mutual respect. Sarah knew Michael was the kind of person who never wanted to use another person's reputation as a shortcut. She admired that he measured himself by his actions rather than by the recognition attached to his name. What Michael did not know was that his connection to Sarah would soon become the detail that changed the entire direction of the situation. Not because his relationship gave him more value, but because it would reveal something important about how quickly people's perceptions could change. A person who had been misunderstood in one moment could suddenly be viewed differently once new information appeared. But the deeper lesson was waiting beneath that revelation. The question was not whether people would treat Michael differently after learning who he was connected to. The real question was why they had not offered that same respect from the beginning. As the situation moved forward, a name began making its way through the department. A name that would soon bring two very different worlds together. And when that name reached the right person, the entire meaning of the encounter would begin to change. The truth about a person is often hidden in the chapters of their life that strangers never see. Before anyone understood the situation involving Dr. Michael Carter, there was a story that began long before that single afternoon in Dallas, Texas. It was a story built on dedication, discipline, and a promise he made to himself many years earlier. Michael had not become a doctor because he wanted people to know his name. He became a doctor because he believed knowledge had a purpose when it was used to help others. As a young student, Michael spent countless hours studying, learning, and preparing for a future where his decisions would affect real lives. He understood that medicine was not only about science. It was about trust. Every patient who sat across from him carried fears, questions, and hopes that could not be measured by a chart or a diagnosis. Michael learned to see the person before the problem. That lesson shaped the way he lived outside the hospital as well. He never believed a title made someone more valuable than another person. A career could describe what someone did, but it could never fully describe who they were. That was why Michael never introduced himself by listing his achievements. He preferred simple conversations, genuine connections, and actions that spoke louder than words. His relationship with Sarah Anderson Carter reflected the same values. Sarah understood the man behind the white coat. She knew the long hours, the quiet sacrifices, and the responsibility Michael carried every day. Their marriage was not built on reputation or status. It was built on respect, trust, and the belief that both people could stand strong as individuals while supporting each other. What most people did not know was that Sarah was connected to a family with a very different kind of public responsibility. Her father, Chief William Anderson, had spent years serving as a respected leader in law enforcement. His position gave him influence throughout the city, but Sarah and Michael rarely allowed those connections to define their lives. Michael especially avoided using relationships as a way to receive special treatment. He believed that fairness meant something only when it applied before people knew who you were. That belief became more important than ever during the unexpected situation that brought these two worlds together. While others were trying to understand the moment in front of them, they had no idea about the history, dedication, and relationships behind the people involved. They did not know they were looking at a doctor who had spent years caring for others. They did not know they were looking at a man connected to a respected family. They only saw what was immediately visible. But life often reveals its biggest lessons when people discover that their first impression was incomplete. Somewhere across Dallas, Chief William Anderson was about to receive information that would connect his professional responsibility with his personal life. A name on a report would soon become more than just a name. It would become a reminder that every person carries a story, and sometimes the most important truths are the ones people never see coming. Some moments in life arrive without warning, but their impact can last much longer than the moment itself. In Dallas, Texas, the situation involving Dr. Michael Carter was beginning to reach someone who had no idea how personal the truth would become. Chief William Anderson was reviewing information from his department when a name caught his attention. At first, it seemed like another situation requiring his leadership and careful review. But as more details appeared, something about the name felt familiar. Dr. Michael Carter. The name connected with a memory, but Chief Anderson could not immediately understand why. Then another detail appeared, and everything began to change. Sarah Anderson Carter, his daughter. The realization did not come from a position of power or influence. It came from a personal connection that suddenly revealed how much of the story had been unseen. Chief Anderson paused as he looked through the information in front of him. He had spent years leading officers, making decisions, and carrying the responsibility of protecting the community. He understood the importance of facts and fairness. But this situation made him consider something deeper. Before he knew who Michael was, before he knew the connection to his family, what assumptions had already been made? That question stayed with him. The situation was no longer just about reviewing an event. It became a moment of reflection about how quickly people can form opinions when they only see a small part of someone's life. Chief Anderson knew Michael was not simply a name connected to his daughter. He knew the kind of person Sarah had chosen to build a life with. He knew Michael was a doctor who dedicated himself to helping others. He knew Michael was someone who valued humility over recognition. But the more Chief Anderson thought about it, the more he realized the most important part was not the connection between them. The important part was what happened before anyone knew about that connection. That was the question that remained. Would the situation have been handled differently if people had known Michael's profession from the beginning? Would the same respect have appeared if nobody discovered his family relationship? Meanwhile, Michael remained focused on the same values that had guided him throughout his life. He did not want his marriage to Sarah to become the reason people listened. He did not want a family connection to erase the lesson hidden within the moment. He believed that respect should exist before introductions, before titles, and before explanations. When Chief Anderson prepared to meet Michael, he carried more than information about a situation. He carried a realization that challenged the way he viewed leadership. He understood that authority was not only about responding when something went wrong. It was also about recognizing the person behind every situation. And when the two men finally stood face to face, the conversation would reveal something much bigger than a family connection. It would reveal a lesson about fairness, perception, and the importance of seeing people clearly before deciding who they are. The most powerful truths are not always revealed through titles, positions, or important names. Sometimes, they appear in the quiet moments when people are forced to look beyond what they first believed. Inside the department in Dallas, Texas, Chief William Anderson prepared to speak with Dr. Michael Carter. He already knew the connection between Michael and his daughter Sarah, but he also understood that the connection itself was not the lesson. The real lesson was what happened before anyone knew. When Michael entered the conversation, Chief Anderson expected explanations, but instead, he found a man who remained calm and thoughtful. Michael did not begin by listing his medical achievements. He did not mention the years he had spent saving lives or the respect he had earned from his patients. He did not use his relationship with Sarah as a way to change the situation. Instead, he focused on something much more important. He focused on the idea that every person deserves to be treated with fairness before anyone knows their background. Chief Anderson listened carefully as Michael explained that his concern was not about receiving different treatment because of who he was connected to. His concern was about the standard that should exist for everyone. A person should not need to prove they are important before being treated with dignity. Those words stayed with Chief Anderson because they revealed something deeper than the situation itself. Michael had every opportunity to make the moment about himself, but he chose to make it about a principle. He wanted people to understand that respect should not arrive only after discovering someone's profession, family, or influence. It should already be present from the beginning. Chief Anderson thought about his own years in leadership. He had always believed that responsibility came from making the right decisions, following procedures, and protecting the community. But this conversation showed him another side of leadership. True leadership also required understanding people before making conclusions about them. It required patience, humility, and the willingness to recognize that every person carried a story beyond what could be seen in a single moment. Michael explained that, throughout his career as a doctor, he had learned the same lesson repeatedly. Every patient had a story. Every family had experiences that were invisible to others. Every person deserved to be approached with compassion. That belief did not disappear when he stepped outside the hospital. It followed him everywhere. Chief Anderson realized that the most important detail was not that Michael was a doctor. It was not that Michael was married to his daughter. The most important detail was that Michael was a person who deserved respect before any of those facts became known. The room became quiet as both men understood the deeper meaning behind the encounter. One man had spent years helping others without seeking recognition. The other had spent years leading others while learning that leadership required more than authority. Their conversation was not about winning or losing. It was about understanding. And in that moment, Chief Anderson discovered that the greatest measure of fairness is not how people are treated after their importance is revealed. It is how they are treated before anyone knows their story. After the truth is revealed, the most important question is not what people discover about someone else. The most important question is whether that discovery changes the way they see the world. For Chief William Anderson, the conversation with Dr. Michael Carter continued to stay on his mind long after the room became quiet. He had spent years making decisions as a leader, but this moment challenged him to look deeper at what leadership truly meant. He thought about all the people who crossed paths with his department every day. Each person arrived with a different background, a different journey, and a different story that could not always be understood immediately. Michael's words reminded him that every interaction carried a responsibility. It was not enough to respond correctly after learning the full truth. The real measure of fairness was how people were treated before that truth was discovered. Dr. Michael Carter never wanted the situation to become a story about his profession or his connection to Sarah. He understood that revealing his identity could easily change the way people viewed him, but that was exactly why he wanted the lesson to remain clear. Respect should not depend on a person's career, family, or position. It should be something given because every individual deserves dignity. Sarah Anderson Carter also understood this about her husband. She knew Michael had always been someone who valued character more than recognition. Growing up as the daughter of Chief Anderson, Sarah had seen how much responsibility came with a public role. She knew that leadership was not only about having authority. It was about listening, learning, and accepting difficult truths when they appeared. Seeing her father and her husband have this conversation showed her that both men were willing to grow from the experience. They came from different worlds, but they shared one important quality. They were both willing to reflect. For Chief Anderson, the moment became a reminder that a uniform, a position, or a title could never reveal the complete story of a person. For Michael, the moment became another example of why he had always chosen patience over anger and understanding over judgment. He did not need people to recognize his importance after discovering who he was. He wanted people to understand that every person they met already had importance before any introduction was made. In the days that followed, Chief Anderson carried that lesson into his role as a leader. He began encouraging deeper conversations about how people were approached and understood. He reminded those around him that every decision affected real human beings with real experiences. The goal was not simply to follow a process. The goal was to remember the person behind every situation. Meanwhile, Michael returned to the hospital and continued doing what he had always done. He cared for patients, supported families, and lived according to the same values that guided him before anyone knew his name. The encounter did not define him because his character had been built long before that day, but it left behind a powerful reminder for everyone involved. The greatest test of respect is not how people act when they discover someone's importance. It is how they act when they believe nobody is watching. Days after the encounter that changed his perspective, Chief William Anderson found himself thinking about one question more than any other. How many people had stories he never took the time to understand? For years, He had believed that experience and responsibility were enough to guide every decision. But his conversation with Dr. Michael Carter showed him that leadership required something deeper. It required the willingness to look beyond the surface and recognize the person standing in front of him. In Dallas, Texas, Chief Anderson returned to his daily responsibilities with a different mindset. The badge he carried represented authority, but he realized that true authority was not measured by how quickly someone could make a decision. It was measured by how carefully someone could understand a situation before making one. He began reflecting on the difference between knowing facts and understanding people. Facts could describe a moment, but they could never reveal an entire life. Michael Carter had been more than a name on a report. He was a doctor, a husband, a son-in-law, and a person who had spent years building a life based on service and compassion. Chief Anderson recognized that the most important part of the experience was not the unexpected family connection. The connection simply revealed what should have already been there from the beginning: respect. Meanwhile, Dr. Michael Carter continued his work at the hospital. His schedule remained busy, his responsibilities remained demanding, and his commitment to his patients never changed. He did not seek attention for what happened. He did not want the moment to become a story about himself. Instead, he hoped people would remember the lesson behind it. Michael knew that situations like this were not only about one person or one interaction. They represented a larger truth about how quickly assumptions could shape the way people were treated. Every day, people met strangers without knowing their history. They saw appearances, circumstances, or brief moments, but they rarely saw the years of effort, challenges, and experiences that shaped someone's life. That was why Michael always chose patience. He knew that a person's first impression was often incomplete. Sarah Anderson Carter noticed the change in both men. She saw her father becoming more thoughtful about his role, and saw her husband continuing to hold onto the same values he always had. She understood that the encounter had created something meaningful because it did not end with blame. It ended with awareness. Two people from different parts of life had been given an opportunity to learn from each other. One learned that leadership required more than making decisions. It required listening. The other showed that dignity did not disappear when someone was misunderstood. As the days passed, Chief Anderson shared the lesson with those around him. He reminded his team that every person they encountered carried a story that might never be visible at first. He encouraged them to remember that respect should not be something people earn after proving their worth. It should be something offered because every person already has worth. The experience with Michael Carter became more than a difficult moment to review. It became a reminder that real change often begins quietly, with one conversation, one realization, and one decision to see people differently. Because the greatest measure of character is not how someone responds when the truth is finally revealed. It is how they treat others before they ever know the truth. Change does not always begin with a dramatic announcement or a public moment. Sometimes, it begins quietly inside the mind of one person who decides to see the world differently. For Chief William Anderson, the experience with Dr. Michael Carter became one of those moments. It was not remembered because of a position, a title, or a family connection. It was remembered because it challenged him to think about what leadership truly meant. In Dallas, Texas, Chief Anderson continued carrying the responsibility of leading his department, but his perspective had shifted. He began paying closer attention to the small moments that often went unnoticed. A conversation, a first impression, a decision made in a few seconds. He understood that these moments could have a lasting impact on the people involved. The lesson from Michael was simple but powerful. Every person deserved to be seen as a complete human being, not just as a situation to be handled. Across the city, Dr. Michael Carter continued living the same way he always had. He arrived at the hospital, cared for his patients, and supported families during difficult times. Nothing about his routine changed because of what happened. He did not allow one experience to define him, because he knew his identity had been built over many years of choices, dedication, and compassion. Michael also understood that real change did not come from making people feel embarrassed or defeated. It came from helping people recognize a better way forward. That was why he never viewed the encounter as a reason to create division. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity for understanding. Sarah Anderson Carter watched the changes happening around her with a quiet sense of hope. She knew both men had taken something meaningful from the experience. Her father had gained a deeper understanding of the responsibility that came with leadership. Her husband had once again shown the patience and character that had always defined him. She believed the most important moments in life were not always the ones that revealed who people were. Sometimes they were the ones that revealed who people could become. As Chief Anderson continued his work, he encouraged conversations about awareness, patience, and fairness. He reminded those around him that every person they met had a history that could not be seen immediately. Someone's appearance, circumstances, or a single moment did not tell the complete story. Behind every person was a journey filled with experiences, challenges, and dreams. The lesson was not about one individual. It was about a principle that applied to everyone. Respect should not depend on discovering someone's importance. It should exist from the beginning. Over time, the encounter between Chief Anderson and Dr. Carter became a reminder that meaningful change often comes through reflection. It comes when people are willing to admit that they may not always see the entire picture. It comes when individuals choose understanding over assumptions and compassion over quick judgment. Michael returned to his patients and Chief Anderson returned to his community, but both carried the same message forward. A person's value is not created by recognition. It exists long before anyone notices it. And the strongest form of respect is the kind given before there is any reason to expect anything in return. The most meaningful stories are not always remembered because of what happened in a single moment. They are remembered because of the lessons that continue long after that moment has passed. For Dr. Michael Carter and Chief William Anderson, the experience that brought their lives together became a reminder that every person carries a story beyond what others can immediately see. In Dallas, Texas, life eventually returned to its familiar rhythm. Michael continued walking through the hospital halls, meeting patients, answering questions, and offering the same care he had provided for years. He never looked at the encounter as something that changed his value because he knew his value had never depended on how others viewed him. His purpose existed before anyone recognized his achievements. It existed before anyone knew his profession. It existed before anyone knew his connection to Sarah Anderson Carter. Michael believed that character was built through daily choices, not through moments when people finally discovered the truth. Chief William Anderson also continued his work, but he carried a different perspective with him. The experience had reminded him that leadership was not only about making decisions. It was about understanding the people affected by those decisions. It was about remembering that every person standing in front of him had a life story that could not be measured by a single interaction. Chief Anderson knew that the lesson was bigger than his relationship with Michael. It was bigger than the surprise of discovering who Michael was. The real lesson was that respect should never arrive only after someone's importance is revealed. Sarah Anderson Carter saw the impact of that lesson on both men. She understood that her husband and her father came from different backgrounds and carried different responsibilities, but both had something important in common. They were willing to learn. They were willing to reflect. They were willing to become better because of a difficult moment. That willingness was what transformed the situation from a misunderstanding into a meaningful lesson. Years later, the story remained powerful because it represented something universal. People often make quick judgments based on what they see first. They see a position, a situation, or a moment, but they do not always see the experiences that shaped the person in front of them. Dr. Michael Carter's story showed that dignity does not come from recognition. It comes from the simple truth that every person deserves respect. Chief William Anderson's story showed that true leadership requires humility and the courage to look deeper. The greatest change does not always happen through large actions. Sometimes it begins with one person choosing to listen, one person choosing to understand, and one person choosing to see beyond assumptions. Michael returned to his mission of helping others. Chief Anderson returned to his mission of serving his community. Both continued forward with a deeper understanding of the same principle. A person should never have to reveal their importance before receiving basic respect. Because the true measure of character is not how people respond when they discover someone's identity, achievements, or connections. The true measure of character is how they treat someone when all they see is another human being standing in front of them.